Everyone, it's Dr. Steve Orma, and today I want to answer the question, is insomnia caused by a trigger? So trigger is like a very popular, widely used term in mental health, which is like there's some kind of like initial cause, initial event that ended up causing the problem. That could be, depression, anxiety, a relationship problem, pretty much anything like that. That there's this trigger, this thing that happened that then therefore caused the problem that the person is experiencing now. And this comes up a lot with insomnia. When I speak with clients, when I initially speak with them, and I ask them, okay, when did your insomnia start? There'll usually be a specific time that the insomnia started. Now, sometimes people say, oh, I've had this problems with sleeping my whole life. But the implied trigger there is like genetics or something like that, they're just a bad sleeper. But outside of that, there's usually some clear, period in time where the insomnia started and there was some kind of event. Now, what is a trigger normally? So different examples of different triggers for insomnia might be depression or anxiety or, trauma, past trauma or current trauma. COVID, was a trigger for many people that started, poor sleep. It could be a medical problem. Frequently I hear hormones. I see a lot of women in their 50s that are menopausal or premenopausal, and they tell me, well, I'm having hormonal issues, and that's the cause of my insomnia. It could be a medication. It could be, doing a lot of travel and changing time zones. It could be stress, like you started a new job, or you moved to a new location, or you broke up from a relationship. So like these are all things that people will refer to as triggers for their insomnia. Now, or they'll blame these things for their insomnia. Okay, so the thing is that insomnia is not caused by a trigger. And this is something that a lot of people get confused with, even doctors and therapists, people in my field, that it's like the trigger happens, depression, anxiety, trauma, whatever it is, etc., and then that causes the insomnia. And that is not what happens. What actually happens is there's a step in between the quote unquote trigger and the insomnia. And that step is the actual thing that causes the insomnia. And this is important to know, because what happens is I see a lot of people and they come to me and they say, oh, I'm having hormonal problems, or I'm depressed, or I'm anxious. And I think that's what's causing my insomnia. And it seems that way, but it really isn't the thing causing the insomnia. And as long as you believe that the trigger, that this other thing is causing the insomnia or caused it, you will stay stuck, because you will put your focus on solving the trigger rather than the insomnia. So let me explain how it works. So yes, probably 99% of the time, there's a trigger, meaning that there is some initial cause of poor sleep for people that they could say, yeah, my insomnia started, 3 years ago when this thing happened. And then they developed the insomnia. So it seems like one caused the other, but what actually happens is, I'll just give an example. Let's say someone, loses their job. That's very stressful. Now that can cause, for many people, some troubled sleep, because it's very stressful to lose your job and you're worried about money, and and that is very stimulating, and then that could affect your sleep at night, and that could cause a poor night of sleep or a few poor nights of sleep. Okay. At this point, this is not insomnia. Okay, this is a few poor nights of sleep, and that's normal, and everybody has that, and everyone will have that from time to time in their life. That's universal. That is not insomnia. That's not insomnia as a disorder. It's just a few poor nights of sleep. At this point, there's no insomnia. Now, what actually creates insomnia from that point is not the trigger, the losing the job and the stress from that. It's the person's response to it. Now, what is the response? Okay, well, I've talked about this, right? It's in response to the few poor nights of sleep. You get really anxious and worried and concerned about your sleep. You're having negative sleep thoughts like, oh my God, what's going on? I'm not sleeping well. Something's the matter. And then in response to that worry, you feel like you need to do something to fix the sleep, to improve the sleep. It's a natural response. Like when there's a problem in life, we want to solve it. We want to do something to improve it or resolve the problem. Unfortunately, in the case of insomnia, the things that people normally do to try to solve the problem create the insomnia. And in fact, what you should actually do at that point is nothing. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But what people will do, and what actually leads to the insomnia, is they will change behaviors around the sleep. Mostly this is around a few different things, but ultimately it ends up you spend too much time in the bed awake. Too much time in the bed awake. And while you're awake, you might be anxious, you might be frustrated, you might be tossing and turning, or you might not be that at all. You might just be sitting there ruminating. But the point is you're in the bed and you're awake. And you're in the bed for quite a long time and you're awake. And then that goes on for several nights. And that is the thing that actually creates the insomnia, because what happens is being awake in the bed starts to get associated with the bed, meaning that your brain starts to think. Your brain associates being in the bed with being awake, and it starts getting confused, and it starts conditioning that response. Okay, just like a conditioned response would be something like, every time you walk into the kitchen, you get hungry or you think about food. Why? Because that's what you do in the kitchen, right? When you go into the kitchen, you're getting food, you're preparing food, and if you've done that thousands of times, that conditioning or that connection gets automatically associated and it becomes a trigger. Another example I've given is that you think about a movie theater. Generally, or you smell that buttered popcorn, you'll think about a movie theater. It's so strongly associated because every time you go to the movie theater, you smell that like buttered popcorn. So the same thing happens with sleep, that normally we're sleeping. And if most of the time we're in bed, we're sleeping, then that is what the association, that becomes a very strong association between your brain and your body and the bed. And the bed actually becomes a trigger for sleep. You get in the bed, your brain remembers, oh, what we do here is we sleep, and then that helps to get you to sleep. Okay, that's like those people who get in bed and they're just out. Okay, it's a very strong trigger for them. Now, going back to what I was saying, what happens is when the initial stressor happens, okay, so again, the stressor can be anything. This causes a few poor nights of sleep. So depression can impact your sleep. Anxiety can impact your sleep. COVID, or worrying about COVID, or getting sick, or hormonal issues. If you're having hot flashes, all these things can cause a few poor nights of sleep. But that is not insomnia yet. Okay? But if you end up during that period of poor sleep spending a lot of time in the bed awake, then that could be caused from either just, you're up in the middle of the night and you're just lying there for an hour or 2 hours awake. It could be caused by getting in the bed earlier because you haven't been sleeping well. So, hey, I'll go to bed 3 hours earlier, 2 hours earlier tonight. Then maybe you fall asleep, but then you end up waking up early, and then you spend a lot of time in the bed awake in the morning because you normally sleep until a certain time, but you're waking up early. Or it could be just sleeping in, which is what a lot of people do on weekends. But, if you're having trouble sleeping, you have a poor night of sleep because of that initial trigger, that may make you want to spend an extra hour or two in bed and sleep later into the morning. Okay, now all of these things are what mess up the sleep and what cause the insomnia, because you're changing your actual behaviors around your sleep. You're changing the time that you're in the bed, that you're going to bed, that you're waking up, and you're changing the amount of time that you're spending in the bed awake versus asleep. When you're sleeping well, 90% or more of the time you're in bed, you're sleeping. 10% or less, you're awake. When you are experiencing a stressor and your sleep is disturbed, and then you start changing your behaviors by sleeping in or spending too much time in the bed, now that percentage starts to shift. Now it's maybe 60% of the time or 70% you're sleeping and 30% you're awake, just lying there. And that's when that association starts getting confused in your brain, where then after a period of time, how long does that actually take? It might take a couple weeks. It might take a few weeks. All of a sudden now, when you get into the bed, you wake up. You become alert. You're having difficulty sleeping because now that association has been made. There's a conditioning there now that the bed is waking you up rather than putting you to sleep. And that is what causes insomnia, okay? Now, at that point, then what normally happens is the cycle feeds itself, because now your sleep is worse and you get even more anxious and worried and concerned. And then that makes you try even harder to sleep, or you spend even more time in the bed trying to get your 7-8 hours or whatever you were doing before. And then that makes the sleep worse, and that feeds the more anxiety and worry. And you see how this is what insomnia is. It's this cycle of worry that leads to poor sleep behaviors, that makes the sleep worse, that leads to worry. And that is what creates insomnia, okay? So it's not trigger insomnia, it's trigger and then you kind of getting really nervous or worried about your sleep, and then changing your behaviors around your sleep that involve ultimately spending too much time in bed awake over a certain period of time, that then gets conditioned to the bed, and then that is what creates insomnia. Okay? So this is important because, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this. You might have a trigger. You might have a stressor. You lose your job. You have to move. You got sick. You got COVID. And your sleep, got really poor. But then the initial trigger went away, right? Most of the time, the trigger goes away. And once that trigger is gone away and it's resolved, if that insomnia has been created from, what I said in terms of your reaction, then it doesn't matter that the trigger is removed, you're still going to have the insomnia because now it's its own issue. Or even if you don't remove the trigger, let's say you're still, having hormonal issues. Let's say you're still dealing with a sickness. Let's say you're still having stress in your life. Now, though, that's not what's causing the insomnia once it's in place. Insomnia now becomes its own separate issue, its own separate problem that lives and is fed on its own by those two things that I said, the worry about the sleep, but most predominantly the poor sleep behaviors and spending too much time in bed awake. So that's what creates the insomnia. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing this, the reason why this is important is because if you believe it's the trigger that causes the insomnia and you're still experiencing that trigger, then you will put your focus on resolving that. You'll put your focus on, resolving the hormonal problem. You'll put your focus on going to therapy for anxiety, or going to therapy for depression, or, getting your thyroid levels fixed because that was the initial cause of the poor sleep. Now, all those things are good to do, right? If there's a problem, you should definitely address hormonal problems, anxiety, depression, trauma, all that. Yes, absolutely. But by addressing that, that's not going to get rid of the insomnia once the insomnia is in place. Now you would have two separate issues to address: the insomnia and then the trigger or whatever that other thing was that was going on. And that's important to know because otherwise you will just put your eye, if you want to solve the insomnia, in other words, if that's a real important goal for you, you have to do the things that actually get rid of insomnia rather than just address the anxiety. I see many clients that have generalized anxiety. They're worried all day long and they sleep like a baby at night. I have other clients who don't have any anxiety and depression. Maybe they're just coming to me for coaching. So there's nothing particularly stressful going on in their life, but they might have insomnia because it's not being caused by those stressful things. So this is important to know if you want to understand the insomnia and have it make sense. And also then if you want to know exactly how to treat it and resolve it. And that is through, I've talked about that on several other videos in terms of, the treatment and the process that's actually incredibly effective for insomnia. Okay. So let me know if this video was helpful today. Let me know if you have any questions, if you can relate to it. And if there's any other questions or other topics around insomnia you want me to do, let me know in the comments below. And if you need any help with insomnia or overcoming it, you can reach out to me. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.